Thoughts on heaven and hell. In this podcast, I'm not going to be presenting a rigorous study, just sharing some of my own reflections. Before I share my reflections on heaven and hell, let me affirm, firstly, that I believe in both of them. Some of my friends joke about me and say, oh yeah, he doesn't believe in hell. That's not true, though you'll see why they joke in a moment. I also want to affirm that I don't believe in purgatory. The medieval idea that after death, since we're not good enough for heaven, and probably not bad enough for hell, we go to a place where our sins are burned off. And eventually, after years, perhaps hundreds or thousands, we are upgraded, so to speak, to heaven. 1 Corinthians 3, the typical passage cited in support of this, does not support this doctrine at all. And the doctrine of the intermediate place of the dead is not the doctrine of purgatory. Here, I'm referring back to the earlier podcast, what happens after we die. Last, there is no reincarnation biblically. Hebrews 9 rules it out. So does biblical theology. There'll be a podcast later on in the series on this topic. So, thanks for listening. I want to share my thoughts on heaven and hell, but I'd like to do it in reverse order so that we can end more positively. Hell is a New Testament concept more than an Old Testament concept. And that's kind of counterintuitive to most people I speak to. I think to me as well, we would expect much more on the judgment of God in the Old Testament and more on the grace of God in the New Testament. Well, there is more grace in a sense that we see God more clearly through the person of Jesus Christ. That lens helps us to understand God's love and goodness in the New Testament more than it does in the Old. That's true. And yet, there's lots of judgment in the New Testament and there's lots of love in the Old. No one spoke about hell more than Jesus. Well, at least if we're counting verses. This notion is virtually unknown in the Old Testament. Even the idea of the afterlife, even the judgment day, seems to not have been widely understood. But by the time of Jesus, hell has become accepted. He's not the only person to speak about it, but he's the primary one. So whatever our concept of Jesus, we have to take that into account. People ask, is the lake of fire real? Is it really a lake of fire? Well, I would say no. It's worse. I mean that the lake of fire is an image. Just as streets of gold, we're thinking about heaven, are an image. It's a picture. It's meant to appeal to our imagination, to help us to understand something that may be more abstract by focusing on something that's more concrete. We've all seen fire. Have you ever seen a large fire, or if you've seen lava? The idea of a lake of fire is just a horrific idea. But it's only an image. The reality is worse.